Welcome to Frontline Dispatches on Organizing Upgrade, a show dedicated to spotlighting the most urgent left organizing and activism happening around the country and beyond for racial and economic justice and so much more. And tune in for future episodes of Dispatches every Wednesday at this time, 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 Central, 4 Pacific. My name is Marcy Ryan. I'm a member of the Organizing Upgrade editorial board, and I'm sitting in for Gerald Lenoir as host today. If you're watching on Facebook or YouTube, please do drop comments and questions in the chat, and we'll be looking at them, hopefully to have a conversation as the show goes on. If you haven't yet, please give Org Up a like and subscribe to this channel. And finally, to stay up to speed with all the amazing content coming out of Organizing Upgrade, sign up on our website to hear about upcoming events, videos, and articles about left strategy for organizers. Okay, let's get into it. Our guest today is Nikkita Oliver, and we're so happy to have them here. Nikkita is a community organizer, cultural worker, artist, attorney, and candidate for Seattle City Council Position 9 in this fall's election. They've served as a community support and cultural worker with Urban Impact, the Union Gospel Missions Youth Reach Out Center, the Urban Youth Leadership Academy, Seattle Urban Academy, Who's Next, and You're Up, and Writers in School. They're currently Executive Director of Creative Justice, an arts-based, healing-engaged space for youth. Nikkita was a founding member of the grassroots Seattle People's Party, and they're part of several coalitions and organizations in the Seattle-King County area, including Decriminalize Seattle, Free Them All, and No New Youth Jail, all of them building a world which centers collective health and liberation from oppressive systems. Thanks again for joining us, Nikkita.
Thank you so much for having me.
So let's start off. Since you have such a deep background in grassroots organizing, could you talk a little bit about how the electoral work and the grassroots organizing feed each other, how you build power at the grassroots electorally and vice versa?
Yeah, so the first election in terms of running an electoral campaign that I participated in as a candidate was in 2017. And it was post the 2016 election. It was after a lot had happened at Standing Rock, and many were organizing around a defund movement in their cities to divest from fossil fuels, to divest from Wall Street banks that were invested in fossil fuels. And for many years, we had been organizing a No New Youth Jail campaign and a Block the Bunker campaign around the building of a new police station in the north end of Seattle. And so entering into 2017, after I think what many found to be a very demoralizing election, we wanted to find a way that we could push back against the political apathy.
Did you mute yourself, Nikkita? We're not hearing. Can
you hear me now?
There you go. Okay.
Yeah. So electoral politics typically have a mainstream way of functioning. They have insider games. They require lots of money, and they're not usually built for working people. They're not meant for marginalized communities. They're very much intended for the ruling class. And so we wanted to be able to bring grassroots organizing to electoral politics so people could get excited about engaging in electoral politics, and that it would be much more about getting elected to a seat, that it would be about building community power. Because as Ella Baker says, we don't need more strong leaders, we need strong communities. And so really using that platform that people were engaged in and thinking about, but very specifically at the local level to push back against apathy. How do we do that to amplify local struggles, grassroots movements, and the work that's already been happening and the work that'll continue to happen that will ultimately push our electeds to make changes? And that 2017 election was very monumental for Seattle. We founded the Seattle People's Party that year. We nearly made the general election. We missed it by under a percentage point. And a lot of folks had said there's no way that a person running very boldly on an abolitionist platform, very boldly anti-capitalist and talking about socialism, could successfully run for mayor of Seattle. They thought we'd get maybe 3% of the vote max. We got 16.9%. And that had organizing. It was about building and strengthening community, which always goes beyond a seat, goes far beyond electoral politics.
So there's a couple of things in there I want to ask you a bit more about the how. So how is it that you're engaging communities more deeply, and how is it that you're able to basically be competitive with the, very established and funded Democratic Party there?
I believe the power of grassroots organizers comes out of our commitment to relationship building and to acknowledging that those who have proximity to struggle also have proximity to the solutions that can both dismantle oppressive systems, but also build the world that we want to live in. That is core and foundational to the way that we do our work as organizers. It's also core and foundational to the way that we campaign. And deeply believe that how you campaign is also reflective of the way that you will be when you're in the position to govern. And so then that 2017 election, there were some key things there. We built our platform around listening post. So we developed a way of being in community, even communities that maybe were not very responsive to our campaign at first, and sitting with them, talking, what's going on? What are you needing? What are you thinking about? And really understanding that when people are hungry, when they can't pay their rent, when they're not sure if their jobs are going to be there, it is very challenging to be involved in politics. We took a page out of the Black Panther Party's book, which is by meeting the people's needs, and they'll be more able to engage in politics. It's hard to think about politics when you're hungry. And I think that particular really started to lay the groundwork for people to be involved in a different kind of campaign, because they knew that it was about a lot more than just a seat. For this campaign that we're in, mutual aid is a huge part of what we're doing. How have community-based networks been what has met people's needs in the midst of the pandemic? How have community-based networks, organized labor, ensured that workers have a way to fight for hazard pay, paid time off, supports, personal protective equipment? How not just of 2020, but even the uprisings of previous years contributed to much of the political work that we're doing, acknowledging that those roots exist in impacted communities. They didn't just pop up in politics. We put them into politics. It's because of how we organize. And so really basing the campaign around the people and not so much around the candidate has a really powerful effect of people seeing themselves in the campaign, but then more importantly, seeing themselves in the policy. If policy is not about people, then what are we doing? And so I think that has been very transformative, that campaigns function in Seattle. We were one of the first campaigns to have a youth led portion of our campaign in 2017. And even though young people under 18 cannot vote, young people under 18 are deeply impacted by policy. One day we'll be able to vote, and they're incredible mobilizers. So we've also really focused some of our work on that 14 to 17 block, understanding that they do have impact. And we've seen in 2020, specifically in Seattle, that young folks have been organizing their own mutual aid networks, organizing their own candidate forums, organizing their own responses to community needs. And I think it's important to see it's important for that work that is already happening to really be the foundation for which we build any type of political campaign, whether you're talking about a referendum, an initiative, an ordinance, or a campaign for elected office. If it's not reflective of what the community has already been doing for itself, then it's not something that especially marginalized community or workers are going to want to commit to or see themselves in. And so that is, again, that's been foundational to how we campaign.
Does that make you different from some of the other left and progressive forces? Because I have the impression there's a number in Seattle who are contesting for governing power. How is your approach the same or different, and what has worked in that whole arena?
Honestly, that is the corporate Dems use that kind of narrative a lot. They'll say things like, well, we're all progressives here, right? And, we might all be using the same language, but we do not all use the same tactics. Where political insiders can do things like go to the head of organizations or the head of even unions, what we're trying to do and striving to do is actually be with the rank and file, organize with the workers, organize with those that are at the grassroots, and have it be a ground up movement rather than a top down movement, which is typically how folks who are political insiders run their campaigns. They do it top down. That, in many ways, I think undermines democracy. Democracy has to be of the people. It needs to be in the people. And one of the problems with our government now is it's too much ran by corporate dollars, too much ran by lobbyists, too much ran by those who have access to power, and pushes out those who most need access or opportunity to make things happen. And so I think that our strategy is different. Even now, in the midst of COVID, we have already been door knocking. We're already doing listening posts. We've been in community. I've been running and participating with mutual aid networks since February of last year, in particular as it relates to COVID relief, or organized incarceration as it relates to COVID. And so I also think that that's the difference. I'm not somebody who suddenly just decided I want to be a politician. I'm a grassroots organizer who was asked to run for office. And really, honestly, invited by people that I'm in partnership with. And that's what really ran our first campaign, and what has continued to mobilize our campaign now for city council is the people, is being asked to do it, as opposed to thinking I'm the one to do it.
Yeah. I just want to try that another way, because I'm not talking about corporate Dems who muddy the waters about what's progressive or not. I'm talking about, are there other actual left organizations, maybe with a different approach, but who are engaged in electoral politics in Seattle, and what that looks like, and if there are lessons from other organizations who are outside of the corporate democratic establishment, if you will.
I mean, I think that's the trouble with Seattle. I think folks look at Seattle and think that we have a very robust left. But what we really have is a very robust center. We do have left organizations. I'm on the local council of the Seattle Democratic Socialists of America, and SDSA has endorsed our campaign. We're endorsed by the Seattle People's Party. We do have other organizations that we work in coalition with or in partnership with. But I think reality is that I'm one of very few in the state who's choosing to run outside of the democratic establishment. And so as a result, we are very frequently, as a campaign, starting in a new way. We don't get access to the same databases. We don't have the same support. We often have to organize to get key endorsements. And I actually welcome that kind of challenge, in the sense that it does put us off with workers, seeing things be mobilized from the ground up. I think brings folks back into democracy in a way that they haven't been in a long time. So I look forward to there being more left candidates that are outside of the establishment. But really, we are one of very few to decide to run third party that would be considered left.
Interesting. You were talking about the role of youth, which was really very dynamic and inspiring. And I'm wondering if the first time you were on Frontline Dispatches, you were actually the very first guest ever. And Whitney interviewed you when you were live in the streets in the Uprisings last summer. How did those uprisings feed into the campaign and feed into the People's Party? Or did they? I'm just thinking they probably.
I think it's been a process of us feeding into each other. So since 2010, I think Seattle has been in a place of really growing in our understanding of what actually makes communities safe. So thinking about basic needs, what does it look like to have social affordable housing? What is actually contributing to why people are so dependent upon police or courts or prosecution? And how do we divest from ineffective systems and honestly harmful systems and invest in communities? I think that's a dialogue we've been having for a while. 2020 really allowed that conversation to surface into the mainstream in Seattle, King County area in a really powerful way. We're saying the word abolition is not, it's not taboo anymore. You know, that people don't look at you and be like, you're too radical for that. It's actually a mainstream conversation that people are having. But prior
Nikkita is at work and having a little momentary glitch with her internet, but I want to take this time to remind people, please do drop comments and questions in the chat and get in on this very rich conversation about community organizing and electoral politics.
Yeah, am I back?
You're back. I was just encouraging
So sorry, y'all.
Conversation. No, I know you're at work, right? So
yeah. Also, we need municipal broadband. Internet should be a public utility. So, but yeah. So just really thinking about, I think that Seattle has been on a trajectory of seeing folks grow initiatives, grow energy outside of the Democratic establishment. And I do think that the movement last summer and in the fall and into this year around defunding the police and investing in community-based led alternatives to policing has grown the base for the conversation that groups like the Seattle People's Party and groups in No New Youth Jail, Block the Bunker, that movements like that have been having for a long time. And so I think it's all feeding into each other. We're building on the momentum of being able to establish these conversations in the mainstream and more people having the language to talk about what does it look like to have social affordable housing and how does that relate to why we're over policed. How does poverty relate to criminalization? How does all of this feed into mass incarceration? Why is it important that we be talking about these things as interconnected rather than separate issues? These are all things that feed into each other. So we believe that that what happened in 2020 has continued to grow our base for this election, but it has been constantly building for the last 10 or 20 years in our region that we'd be able to get to this place.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned that after the uprising last summer, talking about abolition is no longer taboo. You know, it's now out there as a subject for conversation. Are there other ways in which those change the political landscape that you're working in now?
Yeah, you know, we have had some really significant wins because of the uprisings from last year. We've seen nearly an 18% defund in the Seattle Police Department budget, which as of 2019 was $410 million. We've seen the city make a strategic move towards something called participatory budgeting to have a more democratic process of determining how those defund dollars are actually invested in community-based, community-led initiatives. The city also invested $3 million in a research project led by some of the most marginalized Black community members to develop what are the things that can underpin participatory budgeting that would actually directly impact Black communities. Had very significant wins that have only come because of the uprisings in the streets this last year and are very reflective of the demands that got put out in June of 2020. Do I think that we've gone far enough or we've done enough work? Absolutely not. But the work that has happened is directly correlates to the movement of the people.
Involving the most impacted people in the Black community on how to increase participation in a participatory budget project?
Yeah, so there's this really great project called the Black Brilliance Research Project, where members of Black community reflective of different areas, elders, young people, folks who identify as being in sex work, queer and trans Black community members, folks that do anti-violence work, we're not just asked, but compensated and invited to do participatory research. a research report called the Black Brilliance Research that now is being used as the underpinnings for developing a participatory budget cycle that will focus on the 5 bucket areas in that research that will directly impact investments that ultimately will support the Black community. Now, in the state of Washington, we're not allowed to do affirmative action laws directly make investments based on race. But I think a unique way of being able to focus on the impacts of to focus on impacted communities through research, have that inform how participatory budgeting unfolds, and then hopefully in the end that does still impact and support Black communities that have been, for hundreds of years exploited and have never seen repair and reparations happen. Again, I don't necessarily think that this is enough, but I do think it is a creative strategy to get around laws which prevent us from actually making those direct investments.
Because you can have participation all day long, but then does it actually translate into change in the policy, right? So that's why you're running. No?
Absolutely.
I want to invite anybody who's listening and watching to drop comments in, questions, if you have them for Nikkita. And just ask another question. We think a lot at Organizing Upgrade about the moment we're in as one of really needing to push back against what we call white racist authoritarianism. What we saw on display on January 6th, that's the best shorthand. And what it means to pull together a very broad front to do that. And I'm wondering how you see your work in that, because I know that one of the things that meant during the last general election was working with exactly some of these, corporate Democrats that you're talking about. But so how do you think about this question of building broad front and how you participate in it and do your priorities in relation to it?
Yeah, I think that's actually the beauty of the year we're in now, post the impact that the uprisings has had on a lot of people's understanding of white supremacy, the impact that it has, how many of us are complacent in the continuance and perpetuation of white supremacy and white supremacist policies. I think Seattle in particular, having had so many officers that we know were actually were there on January 6th and contributed to white supremacist authoritarianism. I think it has really pushed a lot of folks in Seattle to consider where is that reflected in how Seattle Police Department functions within the city. I think that has, in and of itself, those realizations
need for municipal broadband here, and Nikkita is frozen. So we're getting toward the end of our time. So this is getting to be your last chance to drop something in the chat if you have comments or questions, while we wait for the internet to recover here. There we are.
Yeah, so to make a long story short, I think the way that we're building a broad coalition is through public education, politicizing and galvanizing folks who have, because of everything that happened last year, the way in which, Seattle Police Department honestly gassed, mace, inflicted a lot of harm on protesters for a number of days, has really changed the context of the city and being willing to have conversations about the impacts of white supremacy and how do we actually dismantle and uproot that in systems, and what does it look like to go beyond just representation to transformation. It's not enough to get more Black and brown folks into office if they still reflect the analysis of racialized capitalism in the way that they govern. We need folks who actually are willing to do the work of dismantling those systems and building ones that work for everyone, and can do so with a race analysis, can do so with a class analysis, and can do so with a gender analysis and how they put policies in place.
we're getting close to the end of our time here, but I just, when you were talking about white supremacy, I just wanted to ask if you could take just a minute and zoom out and look at Washington State as a whole, because, and I'm curious to know if the work that you're doing with the Seattle People's Party relates to work that people are doing in other parts of the state, because my understanding is that actually you have a very different climate in the eastern part of the state.
Yeah, you know, we've supported, and so unlike a lot of quote unquote parties, we are not dogmatic about making sure that folks know that is work we are doing. We deeply believe that we need a diverse array of organizations and coalitions who share our analysis and vision doing this work. Rather than centralizing everything under SPP, we want to see things decentralized but with a shared vision. So I supported and worked with Eliana Macias, who is now on the Yakima City Council. She took Dulce Gutierrez's seat, who won that seat after a major redistricting fight to get more representation, more opportunity for Latinx folks in Yakima to be able to have their voice actually matter in that democracy. And so we have been able to partner on that side of the state with candidates to share and how that has supported us getting folks into office. That being said, I think there's a lot of work to do in the state, the west side and the east side of the state. I'd even say just outside of King County, very different opinions about what progress looks like and what it means to be progressive. And so statewide, we have a huge amount of organizing to be doing, but we have seen changes.
You know, before, two things before we have to say goodbye, sadly. One is how people can follow the work that you're doing, and two is just what else you would like to say by way of wrapping up, if you have closing thoughts for us.
Yeah.
Oh.
The Seattle City Council position nine citywide. The campaign can be followed online at Nikkita for 9, Nikkita.
The number 4. Or you can search Nikkita for 9.
Yes. So please follow the campaign. Maybe we can get municipal broadband in the next 4 years. So my next interview with you is a lot less patchy.
And you have a couple more minutes if there's something that we haven't touched on that you feel is really important for people to take away with them.
Yeah,
there's a lot to touch on. So.
Honestly, I think it's important to acknowledge that the climate right now is actually very ripe, I think, for left third-party candidates. I think a lot of communities, a lot of people, especially in light of what's happening in Palestine and the United States' continued support of Israel, are looking for other options for elected leadership and organizing that reflects a different value for the care of humanity and what it looks like to actually push back at racialized capitalism, push back at militarism and imperialism, and redistribute economic and political power. And so would encourage folks who are interested in running as left third-party candidates, now is the time to really continue to lay that foundation. And I think in the next few years, we'll continue to see more folks that diverge from the political establishment, because I think there's a hunger for it.
Yeah, and the experience that you are having, I think, can only enrich that and feed it going forward. Just want to thank people very much for being with us this afternoon. You can find us in the same time slot every Wednesday, 7 p.m. Eastern, 6 Central, and 4 p.m. Pacific. So thank you so very much.
Thank you.